the first time she saw him. He was laughing with his friends at a corner table in the university coffee shop. Not the polite, quiet laugh she was used to from back home, but something loud and genuine that made other people turn and smile too. She had been living in this new country for only 3 weeks, and everything still felt strange and overwhelming. She ordered her usual black coffee and found a seat near the window, pulling out her textbooks like she did every afternoon. But today was different. Today, she kept glancing over at his table, wondering what could possibly be so funny that it made him throw his head back like that. Her family had always taught her that emotions should be kept private. Growing up, her parents never showed affection in front of the children. Her father would nod approvingly when her mother served dinner, and her mother would smile quietly when he came home from work. That was love in her world, quiet, respectful, and practical. Marriage in her culture wasn't about feelings. It was about compatibility, family status, and building a stable future together. Her older sister had married a man their parents chose when she was 22. They seemed content enough, raising their children and managing their household duties. Her sister had once told her that love grows over time through shared responsibilities and mutual respect. But this young man at the corner table seemed to operate by completely different rules. Over the next few days, she began to notice him. Everywhere, in the library, he would save seats for his friends and high-five them when they arrived. During group projects, he would celebrate small wins with enthusiasm that seemed genuine. Not performed. One rainy Tuesday, she was struggling with her umbrella outside the coffee shop when he appeared beside her. Without asking, he held his large umbrella over both of them and walked her to the library entrance. He didn't ask for her number or try to start a conversation. He just smiled, said stay dry, and jogged back through the rain. This small act of kindness puzzled her for days. Back home, if a man helped a woman like that, it meant he was interested in marriage or at least had serious intentions. But this felt different, casual, almost automatic, like helping someone was just what people did here. The next week, she deliberately sat closer to his usual table in the coffee shop. She pretended to read while listening to his conversations with friends. They talked about their weekend plans, shared stories about their families, and discussed their feelings about everything from movies to their future careers. The openness shocked her. He talked about missing his parents during the semester break, about feeling nervous before big exams, about being excited for his friend's birthday party. Where she came from, men didn't discuss emotions so freely, especially not with friends. Feelings were private matters, dealt with quietly within the family or not discussed at all. One afternoon, as she was packing up her books, her pen rolled off the table and stopped near his feet. He picked it up and walked over to return it. "You're in my economics class, right?" he asked, handing her the pen with a warm smile. She nodded, suddenly aware that her heart was beating faster than usual. "I'm struggling with the last assignment. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions sometime? You always seem to understand everything the professor explains." This was her first real conversation with someone from this culture about something personal. She agreed to meet him the next day at the library. During their study session, she learned things that fascinated and confused her. He talked about his parents' marriage like it was a love story. He mentioned how his father still brought his mother flowers every Friday, how they would dance in the kitchen while cooking dinner, how they had met in college and decided to spend their lives together because they just knew they were meant to be. This concept of just knowing was completely foreign to her. In her family's approach, you got to know someone through careful observation, family meetings, and practical discussions about life goals. Love wasn't something that struck like lightning. It was something that developed slowly through shared experiences and mutual respect. But listening to him describe his parents' relationship, she felt something she had never experienced before. Curiosity about what that kind of connection might feel like. He spoke about love like it was the most natural thing in the world, like it was the foundation upon which all important life decisions should be built. "My parents always told me that when you find the right person, everything else falls into place," he explained while highlighting passages in his textbook. They said you'll want to share everything with that person, your dreams, your fears, your daily experiences. She thought about her own parents, who shared household responsibilities efficiently but rarely shared personal thoughts or feelings. They worked as a team, but she had never seen them as friends or companions in the way he described. As weeks passed, their study sessions became regular occurrences. She found herself looking forward to these meetings, not just for the academic help, but for the glimpse into a completely different way of thinking about relationships and emotions. He would ask her questions about her background, but she struggled to explain her family's approach to love and marriage without making it sound cold or calculated. How could she tell him that her parents had already begun discussing potential marriage matches for her? How could she explain that in her world, romantic feelings were considered unreliable and potentially dangerous to family harmony? Instead, she found herself asking him endless questions about his culture's approach to relationships. Why did people date multiple partners before choosing one? How did they know when they were truly in love? What made someone willing to choose their own happiness over their family's wishes? His answers opened up a world she had never imagined, one where individuals had the freedom to follow their hearts, where personal happiness was considered important, where love was seen as a strength rather than a weakness. But with this new awareness came a growing sense of internal conflict. She began to wonder if her family's way was the only right way, or if perhaps she had been missing something important all her life. The more she learned about this different approach to love, the more curious she became about what it might feel like to experience it herself without realizing it. She was about to embark on a journey that would change everything she thought she knew about herself, her culture, and the mysterious thing called love. 3 months into their friendship, she started what she would later call her cultural research project. Of course, she never told him that's what it was. To him, she was just a curious international student asking innocent questions about American dating culture. It began with simple observations. She would watch how he interacted with other people, taking mental notes like a scientist studying a new species. When they walked across campus together, she noticed how he would hold doors open for strangers, smile at people he barely knew, and stop to pet dogs that their owners were walking. "Why do you do that?" she asked one afternoon after he had spent 5 minutes playing with a golden retriever outside the library. "Do what?" he replied, genuinely confused. "Talk to people you don't know. Pet animals that aren't yours. Help people carry heavy things." He laughed, but not in a mocking way. "I guess it just feels good to make someone's day a little brighter." "Don't people do that where you're from?" She shook her head. "Back home, you minded your own business. You were polite to neighbors and helpful to family, but you didn't go out of your way to interact with strangers. It wasn't considered rude. It was just how things were done." This difference fascinated her. She began to wonder if his approach to love came from the same place, this natural inclination to spread kindness and connect with others. Was romantic love just an extension of his general way of being in the world? She decided to test this theory. The next week, she started asking him more personal questions during their study sessions. She would wait for quiet moments, then casually bring up topics about relationships. "How do you know when you like someone?" she asked while they were reviewing economics notes. He looked up from his textbook, surprised by the sudden change in topic. "I guess you think about them a lot. You want to spend time with them. You feel happy when you see them," she wrote this down in her notebook, right next to her economics formulas. When he noticed, she quickly explained that she was trying to understand American culture better. "What about when you really care about someone? Like, more than just liking them?" She pressed. "You mean when you love someone?" He set down his pen and gave her his full attention. "That's different. Love is when you want to share everything with that person, when their happiness becomes as important as your own, when you can't imagine your future without them in it." She scribbled more notes, her heart beating faster. These concepts were so foreign to everything she had been taught, yet they stirred something deep inside her that she couldn't quite name. Over the following weeks, her questions became more specific and strategic. she would create situations to study his responses, like a researcher conducting controlled experiments. One rainy evening, she texted him saying she felt sad and homesick. Within 20 minutes, he showed up at her dorm with hot chocolate and a playlist of what he called comfort music. He sat with her for 3 hours, listening to her talk about missing her family and feeling lost in this new culture. She observed how his face showed genuine concern, how he asked thoughtful questions, how he didn't try to fix her problems but simply offered his presence. This kind of emotional support was completely different from what she knew. In her family, sadness was handled privately or with practical solutions, not with hot chocolate and patient listening. The next week, she tested his consistency. She mentioned feeling overwhelmed with schoolwork, curious to see if his caring response had been a one-time thing. Again, he offered to help. He spent an entire Saturday helping her organize her notes and explaining concepts she found difficult. She found herself documenting everything: how he remembered small details about her life, how he checked in on her after she mentioned having a bad day, how he included her in group activities with his friends even though she was quiet, and still learning the social customs. But the most interesting part of her research involved testing his reactions to competition. She began mentioning other male students in their conversations, watching his face carefully for signs of the jealousy she had read about in Western novels. That guy from our history class asked if I wanted to study together, she told him one afternoon. Observing his reaction, she caught a brief flicker of something across his face, not anger, but something like disappointment mixed with curiosity. "That's great," he said, though his smile seemed slightly forced. "He's pretty smart. You'll probably learn a lot." She filed this reaction away with her other observations. So he did experience jealousy, but he handled it by being supportive, rather than possessive. This was another piece of the puzzle she was trying to solve. As her experiments continued, she started testing his boundaries in more subtle ways. She would be unusually quiet during some of their meetings to see if he would notice and ask what was wrong. She would decline his invitations occasionally to observe whether he would keep asking or respect her space. Every response became data in her growing understanding of this thing called love. She was building a comprehensive picture of how someone behaved when they cared deeply about another person: the attentiveness, the consistency, the willingness to prioritize someone else's needs. But somewhere between conducting these experiments and analyzing the results, something unexpected began to happen. The emotion she thought she was simply observing and cataloging started to feel familiar. When he smiled at her, she felt warm inside. When he remembered something small she had mentioned, her heart would skip a beat. She told herself these were just natural responses to kindness. Anyone would feel good when treated well. She was simply experiencing the subject matter of her research firsthand, which would make her observations more accurate. She didn't yet realize that by studying love so closely, she was walking directly into its path. Her careful experiments were teaching her not just about how love worked, but about how it felt. And despite all her analytical distance, she was beginning to understand why her family feared this emotion so much. It was starting to change her, and she wasn't sure she could control where those changes would lead. But she was too curious to stop her research now. She needed to understand more about this powerful force that seemed to make people willing to reorganize their entire lives around another person's happiness. Little did she know that her next phase of experiments would reveal just how dangerous that curiosity could be. By the start of their second semester together, her experiments had become much more sophisticated. What started as simple questions about love had evolved into complex emotional tests that she designed with the precision of a psychology researcher. She had filled an entire notebook with her observations, creating categories for different types of caring behaviors. There were sections titled protective responses, comfort techniques, and loyalty indicators. She studied these notes like they were formulas for understanding the human heart. Her biggest breakthrough came when she decided to test how deep his feelings actually went. She knew that in her culture, real commitment was measured by willingness to face family disapproval and social pressure. So she began sharing carefully selected stories about her background, watching his reactions. Like a scientist monitoring lab results. My parents have been talking about my future marriage. She mentioned casually one afternoon while they were walking through the campus park. She had rehearsed this moment, planning exactly how to deliver the information. He stopped walking so suddenly that she almost bumped into him. Marriage. But you're only 20. In my culture, parents start looking for suitable matches when their daughters reach university age. She explained, studying his face for micro-expressions. They want to make sure I marry someone from a good family with similar values. She watched the confusion spread across his features, followed by something that looked like panic. This was exactly the reaction she had predicted, but seeing it in person felt more intense than she had expected. But what about what you want? He asked, his voice slightly strained. Don't you get to choose? Choice is less important than compatibility. In family harmony, she replied, reciting the lesson she had heard her entire life. But for the first time, saying these words felt strange, like she was reading lines from a script she no longer believed in. Over the next few days, she observed how this information affected his behavior. He became more attentive, more protective, asking subtle questions about her family's expectations and timeline. She documented how he would steer conversations toward her feelings about arranged marriage, clearly hoping she would express some resistance to the idea. This gave her the perfect opportunity to test his commitment level. She began sharing more details about her family's traditional values, each story designed to gauge whether he would fight for their relationship or accept cultural defeat. My older sister never dated anyone before marriage. She told him one evening while they were studying. She says it worked out fine. She learned to care for her husband after the wedding ceremony. She watched him grip his pen tighter, saw the muscle in his jaw tense. He was clearly struggling with concepts that challenged everything he believed about love and relationships. But don't you want to experience that feeling of choosing someone because you can't imagine life without them? He asked quietly. She pretended to consider this question seriously, though she had already prepared her response. I've never experienced that feeling, so I don't know what I'm missing. Maybe it's better to build a stable life based on practical considerations rather than unpredictable emotions. His reaction was immediate and intense. He spent the next hour trying to explain the beauty of romantic love, sharing stories about couples who had overcome obstacles to be together, describing the joy of having someone understand you completely. She took mental notes on everything, his passion, his frustration, his desperate need to make her understand what she might be giving up. This was deeper than simple attraction or casual caring. This was someone who had developed real feelings, fighting against the possibility of losing her. But her most revealing experiment came when she decided to test his reaction to direct competition. She began mentioning a young man from her home country whose family had expressed interest in a marriage arrangement. His family owned several successful businesses, she said, watching his face carefully. My parents think he would provide good security and status. They want to arrange a meeting during my next break from university. The pain that flashed across his face was so genuine that she almost broke character and reassured him immediately. Instead, she forced herself to continue the experiment. He's very accomplished for his age. My family seems pleased with the possibility. She observed how he tried to hide his distress, how he struggled to respond supportively while clearly wanting to object. He asked careful questions about her feelings regarding this potential arrangement, obviously hoping she would express reluctance or ask for his advice on how to avoid it. When she remained neutral about the prospect, she watched him wrestle with his emotions in real time. He wanted to fight for her, but he also respected her culture enough to feel conflicted about interfering with her family's wishes. The complexity of his internal struggle fascinated her. This wasn't simple possessiveness or jealousy, it was genuine care competing with respect for her autonomy and cultural background. He was trying to be supportive while his heart was clearly breaking. During this phase of her research, she also began testing his forgiveness patterns. She would be deliberately distant during some of their meetings, then warm and engaging during others. She wanted to understand how someone in love handled emotional inconsistency. His responses revealed remarkable patience when she was cold or distracted. He would give her space but continued to show small gestures of care when she was affectionate. He would light up but never demand an explanation for her previous distance. She documented how he seemed to accept her moods as part of who she was, rather than taking them personally or trying to control them. This was completely different from the conditional acceptance she had observed in her family, where emotions were expected to be regulated and predictable. But as her experiments grew more sophisticated, something unexpected began happening to her. The emotions she was studying started affecting her in ways she hadn't anticipated. When she saw the genuine pain in his eyes during her tests, she felt an unfamiliar ache in her chest. When he showed patience with her manufactured mood swings, she experienced something that felt dangerously close to gratitude and affection. She told herself these were just sympathetic responses, natural human reactions to witnessing someone else's emotions. But deep down, she was beginning to suspect that her carefully controlled experiments were teaching her more than she had bargained for. She was learning not just how love looked from the outside, but how it felt from the inside. And that knowledge was starting to complicate everything she thought she understood about herself and her future. The moment she realized she had fallen into her own trap came on a Thursday evening in late March. She was sitting in her dorm room, updating her research notes as usual, when she found herself writing about how his laugh made her feel. Instead of simply documenting that he had laughed, she stared at the page in horror. Instead of clinical observations, she had filled 3 paragraphs with descriptions of how his presence made her feel safe, how she looked forward to their meetings more than anything else in her week, how the thought of the arranged marriage her parents were planning now made her stomach twist with anxiety. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was the researcher, not the subject. She was supposed to be studying love from a safe distance, not experiencing it herself. But as she reviewed her recent entries, the evidence was undeniable. Her handwriting had changed from neat, analytical notes to messy, emotional scribbles. Her observations had shifted from subject chose protective behavior to he walked me home in the rain and I didn't want him to leave. The realization hit her like a physical blow, somewhere between studying love and pretending to experience it. The pretending had become real. The emotions she thought she was manufacturing for research purposes had grown into something genuine and overwhelming. For the first time, she understood why her family feared romantic love. It wasn't because they considered it foolish or weak. It was because they recognized its power to completely reorganize a person's priorities and loyalties. She felt it happening to her now, this strange pull that made her question everything she had been taught about duty and family expectations. The arranged marriage that had once seemed like a distant, manageable future now felt like a prison sentence. The idea of never seeing him again, of spending her life with someone chosen by her parents instead of her heart, made her feel physically sick. But recognizing her feelings created a new problem. How could she tell him the truth about what she had been doing? How could she explain that their entire relationship had started as an experiment, that every vulnerable moment he had shared had been collected as data? She tried to continue their friendship as if nothing had changed, but maintaining the deception became increasingly difficult. During their study sessions, she would catch herself staring at his hands while he wrote, wondering what it would feel like to hold them when he smiled at her. She would feel her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with research and everything to do with genuine affection. The worst part was watching him struggle with the cultural barriers she had presented as insurmountable obstacles. He had clearly developed deep feelings for her, but he was trying to be respectful of what he believed were her family's non-negotiable expectations. One afternoon, while they were walking across campus, he stopped suddenly and turned to face her. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. Her heart started pounding. She nodded, afraid to trust her voice. "Do you ever think about what it would be like if things were different? If you had the freedom to choose your own path?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with everything they had never directly discussed. She knew this was her chance to tell him the truth about her feelings, about her experiments, about how much everything had changed for her. Instead, she heard herself giving the same cultural explanation she had rehearsed so many times. It's not about freedom. It's about responsibility to family and tradition. The disappointment in his eyes was crushing. She watched him accept what he thought was her final answer, saw him take a small step back as if to give her more space. That night, she called her sister for the first time in months. She needed to talk to someone who understood their family's expectations, someone who might help her make sense of what she was feeling. "I think I'm in trouble," she whispered into the phone after exchanging the usual pleasantries. "What kind of trouble?" her sister asked, immediately concerned. "The emotional kind." There was a long pause. Her sister understood immediately what she meant. "Oh no. You've developed feelings for someone there, haven't you?" "I didn't mean for it to happen. I was just trying to understand how their culture works, and somehow you got caught in it yourself," her sister finished gently. "I was afraid this might happen when you went so far from home." They talked for 2 hours, her sister sharing insights about the weight of family expectations and the complexity of choosing between personal happiness and cultural loyalty. But what struck her most was something her sister said near the end of their conversation. "The hardest part isn't choosing between love and duty. It's living with the knowledge of what you're giving up, no matter which choice you make." After hanging up, she sat in her room staring at her research notebook. All those careful observations, all those strategic experiments, they had taught her exactly what she thought she wanted to know. She now understood love completely, could describe its patterns and behaviors with scientific precision. But understanding love and living with it were entirely different things. The clinical knowledge felt useless in the face of the overwhelming emotions that had taken root in her heart. The next morning, she noticed he was watching her differently during their study session. There was something calculating in his gaze that she recognized because she had worn the same expression herself so many times. "You've been asking me a lot of questions about love and relationships," he said carefully, not looking up from his textbook. Her blood ran cold. "Just trying to understand cultural differences." "Right." He was quiet for a long moment. "It's just that sometimes it feels like you're studying me instead of studying with me." The observation was so accurate that she felt her face burn with shame. He had noticed. Of course he had noticed. She had been so focused on conducting her experiments that she hadn't considered how obvious her behavior might be to someone who was actually paying attention to her. "That's ridiculous," she said, but her voice sounded hollow even to herself. He finally looked up at her, and she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Doubt, confusion, and the beginning of what looked like hurt. "Is it?" he asked quietly. The question hung between them like a challenge. She knew this was the moment when everything would either be revealed or forever buried under layers of deception. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. But instead of confessing, she closed her notebook and mumbled something about having to prepare for another class. As she walked away, she felt his eyes following her, filled with questions she wasn't ready to answer. That night, she realized her experiment had succeeded beyond her wildest expectations. She now understood love completely, not just how it looked from the outside, but how it felt to experience it, to be changed by it, and to face losing it. The problem was that her success had come at a cost she never anticipated. She had gained the knowledge she sought, but in the process, she had potentially destroyed the very thing that had taught her what love really meant. The confrontation came 2 weeks later, during what was supposed to be their regular Thursday study session. She had been avoiding direct conversations with him since that moment, when he questioned her motives, but she couldn't avoid him completely. Without making things more obvious, she arrived at the library to find him already there. But instead of textbooks, he had a piece of paper in front of him covered with handwritten notes. Her stomach dropped when she realized what it was. He had been making his own observations about her behavior. "We need to talk," he said without his usual warm greeting. His voice was calm, but she could see tension in the way he held his shoulders. She sat down across from him, her heart hammering against her ribs. About what? About the fact that for the past 6 months, you've been treating our friendship like a research project. The words hit her like cold water. She opened her mouth to deny it, but he held up his hand to stop her. Let me finish. At first, I thought I was imagining things. The constant questions about love and relationships, the way you would watch my reactions like you were taking mental notes, how you always seemed to be testing my responses to different situations. He picked up his paper and glanced at it, but then I started paying closer attention. I noticed how you would create scenarios that seemed designed to provoke specific emotional reactions from me. The stories about arranged marriage, the mentions of other guys, even the way you would be distant some days and warm others, it all felt calculated. To be natural, she felt exposed, like he had stripped away a protective covering she didn't even know she was wearing. All her careful observations, all her strategic experiments, he had seen through every single one. I started keeping my own notes, he continued, his voice getting quieter, and the pattern became impossible to ignore. You weren't just asking questions about love, you were studying it, studying me. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. She knew she had to say something, but every possible response felt inadequate or dishonest. It wasn't supposed to hurt you, she finally whispered. So you admit it. There was no anger in his voice, which somehow made it worse. Just disappointment and confusion. Why? What was the point? She took a shaky breath and tried to explain something she barely understood herself. In my culture, we don't believe in romantic love the way you do. I thought it was something Americans made up, something unrealistic and impractical. But watching you, listening to your stories about your parents, seeing how you treated people, I became curious. Curious enough to use me as a test subject. The blunt assessment made her flinch. I wanted to understand if love was real or just a cultural myth. I thought if I could study it objectively, I could figure out the truth. And what did you conclude? His tone was clinical now, matching the detached approach she had used for months. This was the moment she had been dreading, but also the moment when she finally had to be completely honest. With him and with herself, I concluded that it's real, she said, her voice barely audible. More real than anything I've ever experienced. And I know that because somewhere during my experiments, I stopped being the observer and became the subject. She watched his face change as he processed what she was saying. The hurt was still there, but now it was mixed with confusion and something that might have been hope. You're saying you developed feelings for me while you were studying whether feelings were legitimate? I'm saying I fell in love with you while trying to figure out if love actually existed. The words felt strange coming out of her mouth. It was the first time she had ever said I love you to anyone, and she was saying it as part of a confession about deception. He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. She waited, knowing she had no right to rush his response or expect forgiveness. The arranged marriage story. He finally said, was any of that true? All of it. My parents really are looking for a husband for me. They really do expect me to come home after graduation and marry someone they choose. The only thing I lied about was my feelings regarding it. And how do you feel about it now? Terrified, she admitted. 6 months ago, I accepted it as inevitable. Now the thought of marrying someone I don't love, of never seeing you again, makes me feel like I can't breathe. She watched him struggle with this information. She could see him trying to separate his hurt over her deception from his feelings about her current situation. So what happens now? He asked eventually. I don't know. It was the most honest answer she could give. I understand if you can't forgive me for treating you like an experiment. I understand if you don't believe that my feelings are genuine now, given how they started. The thing is, he said slowly, looking back, I can see the moments when you stopped acting like a researcher and started acting like yourself. The night you called me when you were homesick, that wasn't an experiment, was it? She shook her head. That was real. I was genuinely sad. And you were the only person I wanted to talk to. And when you seemed nervous about me meeting your study group friends, I was worried they might say something that would make you think less of me. She paused. That wasn't research either. That was just me being scared of losing someone I cared about. They sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the complexity of a relationship that had begun with deception, but had somehow evolved into something genuine. I need time to think about this, he said finally. Not just about forgiving you, but about what it means that you're supposed to go home and marry someone else. She nodded, understanding that she had no right to ask for immediate forgiveness or instant solutions. Can I ask you one thing? She said as they gathered their belongings. What? Do you think it's possible for something real to grow from something that started fake? He looked at her for a long moment. I guess we're about to find out. Over the next few weeks, they had several more conversations about what had happened and what it meant for their future. He struggled with feeling manipulated, while she grappled with the realization that understanding love had only made her situation more complicated, not simpler. In the end, they both learned that love isn't just about the feelings themselves, it's about trust, honesty, and the courage to be vulnerable with another person. Her experiments had taught her what love looked like from the outside, but only by nearly losing it did she understand what it really meant from the inside. The story didn't end with a dramatic choice between cultures or a perfect resolution of their conflicts. Instead, it ended with two people who had hurt each other trying to figure out whether something genuine could be rebuilt from a foundation that had started as deception. She returned home for the summer knowing that she finally understood love, not as a cultural curiosity or research subject, but as a powerful force that had changed who she was. Whether that understanding would be enough to help her navigate the impossible choice between family duty and personal happiness remained to be seen. But one thing was certain, she would never again be able to pretend that love was just a Western myth or frivolous emotion. She had learned its reality the hard way, by experiencing both its power to transform and its capacity to complicate everything she thought she knew about herself.